Sometimes life gives some twists that make us jaw drop, right? It seems that the universe likes to play with our calm. It all started with something silly. My husband, Dave, traveling for 2 weeks. It was supposed to be just routine. Me, pajamas, and Netflix. At least it was the plan. But look, fate loves to preach pieces. And in this case, the play had a name and surname. Marcus, the new neighbor. He appeared out of nowhere, knocking on my door with an excuse even innocent. Or it seemed. A lamp flashing on the porch. Serious? But the way he smiled already left me in light. Do you know that kind of face that comes and it seems that the environment changes? He had that way. Safe, provocative, as if the world was in his control. And me? Well, I tried not to give morale. But let's face it, it was impossible ignore. As he changed the lamp, I tried to convince myself, it's just a neighbor, it's just a lamp. It's just. But each time our eyes crossed, it seemed that he said, I know what I'm doing. My body knew too. And do you want to know? Part of me loved the idea. And here comes the question that doesn't want to shut up. What do you do when something like this falls into your lap? Something unexpected, almost prohibited but deliciously tempting? Well, this is a story that you will want to hear to the end. That night, Marcus appeared as who wants nothing, but left everything turned inside out. The balcony light flashed, and I was about to lose patience. And then, out of nowhere, he was, knocking on my door with a mischievous smile and a promise changes. Leave me. Without ceremony, he took the tools and went straight to the point. Each movement of his seemed like a spectacle. The firm, safe hands, as if they knew exactly what to do, and exactly where to move. It was hard not to look. Too difficult. Do you always fix things that fast? I asked, trying to disguise the tension that was already burning in the air. He laughed, that charm full of charm that seemed to invade my space. Only when I want to impress. The answer came like a low blow. My face warmed, and I caught myself laughing nervously. Or maybe something else. As he worked, that silence was not just silence. It was almost palpable, as if every second carried a provocation not said. And from time to time, I took his eyes on me. Direct, intense, as if he were testing as far as he could go. Or maybe, how far I would leave. Ready, he said, finally ending. But he didn't leave soon. He stood there, staring at me with that smile from who knows he's in charge. If you need anything else, just call it, he added, but the tone was more than friendly. It was an invitation. Before I could answer, he was leaving that trail in the air, a smell of desire mixed with tension. When the door closed, I stood there, wondering what the hell had just happened. Just a neighbor, right? But if that's all, why did my heart seem to want to jump out of my chest? And do you know what was worse? A part of me wanted him to come back. Maybe he knew that. Maybe I wanted him to know. After that night, I thought, everything was going to calm down. An exchange of favors. Nothing more. But Marcus wasn't the kind that disappears easy. Not when he had already opened a door. Literal and figuratively. Later, I received a message. I hope the lamp is working well. If you need something else, just call it. Simple, straightforward, but full of second intentions. Or at least, that's how it sounded for me. I answered fast, trying to be educated, but also keeping my guard. Hi. It's perfect, thank you. And of course, I call you if something appears. I put a smiling emoji at the end, like a shield. But inside, everything was a mess. Only, in the following days, he continued. Short, direct messages. A meme here, a silly question there, and, from time to time, something that made my stomach turn. You are very good company, you know. My heart jumped when I read it. He knew exactly what he was doing. So, on the third day, another excuse came up. This time, the kitchen tap began to leak. A problem I knew how to solve alone. But I called Marcus. You can judge me, but it was impossible to resist the idea of having you there again. He appeared fast, almost as if waiting. And while working in the sink, we talked about everything and nothing at the same time. It made it look so easy, but every word, every look, seemed loaded with something I didn't want. Or maybe I really wanted to recognize. It was then that he casually mentioned that he had ended a relationship recently. A simple comment, but it has been loaded with something more, as if he wanted to know, as if leaving the door open for something else. When he finished, he didn't leave immediately. Marcus stayed there, leaning against the sink, looking at me, in a way that made time seem to slow down. "You know you can count on me, right?" he said, with a smile that seemed to go beyond the words. I nodded, but inside, the real question was, to count on him. Why exactly? After that day, Marcus's messages became more frequent, nothing explicit, but loaded with a subtext that seemed to scream. It was as if every word of him came with an invisible wink. And me? Well, I was starting to like the game, even without knowing the rules. So, in a late afternoon, while making coffee, I received a message that caught me by surprise. "Coffee? It's not fair for you to keep everything to you." I laughed, biting my lip. I answered jokingly, "Who said you like my coffee?" But in less than 10 minutes he returned with a right blow. "Invite me, I tell you." He appeared shortly thereafter, with that easy smile that disarmed any attempt to keep my control. We sat in the kitchen, and as we had coffee, he started talking about himself, travel stories, hobbies, and even recent end details. But it wasn't just what he said, it was the way he looked at me, as if I were the center of the universe at that moment. It was impossible not to feel special. The scene was simple, but what rolled underneath was everything but innocent. The energy between us was dense, as if something is about to happen to any second. When he left, I stood there, staring at the door, feeling that he had taken a piece of me without even asking permission. It was not long before he took the next step. "There will be a casual barbecue in my house on Saturday. No big deal, just a few friends. It appears," said the message. It was as casual as a Molotov cocktail, and I knew. But the problem? I wanted to go. I wanted to see where it was going, to give. On Saturday, I chose an outfit that seemed to say it was unintentionally, but marked every curve in the right place. I didn't know exactly what I expected, but I knew I wasn't just going for the barbecue. When I arrived, Marcus was there, relaxed, beer in his hand, and that smile that dismantled me every time. "Glad you came. I was already thinking I was going to have to get you," he said, with a tone that was more joke than invitation. But the game had teeth. I laughed, but you could feel the heat climbing to the face. His friends were friendly, but with each conversation, it was Marcus who stole the scene. He was around, including me in everything, as if I were the star of the night. And deep down, I liked it. I don't like it. I loved it. The best part was when we were near the barbecue. He leaned very close, enough to make my heart jump, and let out, "You look beautiful with that smile." It was simple, but the way he said, it was like the words carrying a weight that he took my breath for a second. That afternoon was full of laughs and conversations, but there was also something more. A tension in the air, a spark that no one mentioned but everyone felt. When I got home, I took my cell phone and there was. Marcus had posted a picture of the barbecue on Instagram. The caption, "Good food, even better company," just a simple phrase. But it made me freeze. Was it just an innocent gesture? Or was there a message hidden there? I spent the whole night thinking about that caption, and in it, I couldn't turn off my head. It was as if every time he closed his eyes, his smile came back to tease me. It was a rainy night, of those where the wind howling and makes the house look more empty. I was on the couch, wrapped in the blanket, trying to pretend I cared about the movie that passed, until the bell rang, and my heart jumped. Who would appear here, in the middle of a storm? I opened the door and almost lost the air. Marcus was there, boring, with hair stuck to his forehead and eyes loaded with something I didn't know if it was guilt or desire. "Sorry to appear like this," he said, his voice firm but embargoed. "I needed to talk to you." I invited him to enter, still trying to understand what was happening. As he took the towel I offered, we stopped, staring at each other. He seemed to mean something, but hesitated. Finally, he broke the silence. "I thought long before I came here, and I know it may not be the right time, but I can't keep it anymore." My heart began to beat so strong that it seemed to echo in the room. "What do you mean, Marcus?" My voice came out low, almost a whisper. He stepped ahead, and the sound of the rain outside seemed to disappear. "I like you," he said straight, bluntly. "More than it should, but I can't pretend I don't feel it." The intensity in his eyes was overwhelming. Those words hit me like lightning, and I knew deep down that there was no way to escape what was going on. I stood, trying to sue. He had just played everything at the table, and I didn't know how to react. The silence between us was so heavy that it almost seemed to scream. The only sound was the rain beating against the window, but even that seemed distant. All I felt was him, Marcus. "This is not that simple," I muttered, my voice loaded with uncertainty. He took another step. It was so close that I could feel his warmth. "I know it's not simple, but that doesn't change what I feel," he said, his voice hoarse, full of emotion, and his gaze made me feel that at any moment he would cross the limit. Tension was so strong that it seemed impossible to breathe. He was holding on. That was obvious. But the space between us was so small now, so small that all I could think was, what happens if he doesn't stop? Or if I don't want him to stop? "You know I'm married," I said, as if I needed to remember the reality. My voice was shaking, but not of weakness, something that burned inside. "And yet, you are here." He just nodded, running his hand through the damp hair, with that look that seemed to cross my soul. "I know," he answered, his voice low, hoarse. "But there are things we feel, things I can't control." That moment seemed taken from a dream, or a delicious nightmare. The world around us has disappeared, as if everything had stopped. Marcus was so close that his heat seemed to mix with mine. When he raised his hand, hesitating before touching my face, my heart fired. "I just needed you to know," he whispered, as if every word carried a weight that he could no longer bear alone. My mind was in chaos, a mess I could barely organize. Part of me shouted to stop, to leave, but there was another part, a dangerous part, which I had never heard before, which I wanted to continue. Who wanted to know how far it could go? It was there, at that moment, that the chip fell. There was no return. I was on the edge of a cliff, and the jump was inevitable. Whatever I chose, I knew my life would never be the same. After that night, my head looked like a whirlwind. I tried to focus on everyday life in simple things, but it was useless. "Everything, absolutely everything," Marcus reminded me. His smile, the way he said my name, even the way he breathed when he was around. It was as if he had left invisible marks in every corner of my mind. Dave called that morning, with the same animated energy as always. He talked about the work, the incredible project he was developing, and I answered, pretending enthusiasm. But inside, I felt an overwhelming guilt. Every word of him was a cruel reminder of who I should be, whose I was for him. "I miss you," he said before he turned off, and I wanted to answer the same. But all I could hear was Marcus's voice, still echoing in my head. And Marcus? He did not disappear. He never disappeared. His messages were simple, but loaded with second intentions. "I hope you had a good night," he wrote once. Just that. But the simplicity of these words hit me like a shock. I knew what he meant, and I knew that part of me wanted to answer. I forced myself to think of everything I had built with Dave, the promises, the moments, the life we created together. But whenever I did that, Marcus appeared in my mind like a hurricane, a delicious and devastating chaos that invaded my life, without asking for permission, destroying all my certainties. I should be angry with him. Anger for messing up everything, because I made me feel things that I shouldn't, but I couldn't. Maybe because deep down, I knew it was not just his fault. I was as wrapped in this as he, and somehow I didn't want it to end. There was a fire, burning inside me, something I could barely control. It was as if each choice pulled me to one side, but deep down, I already knew which one I was about to do, even if it meant destroying everything. What do you do when your head screams something, but your body, and maybe something deeper, whispers another? When logic calls for control, but desire, desire only wants freedom? The following days were a real war. On the one hand, Dave, my husband, my safe haven, the man I shared a life with. On the other hand, Marcus, the hurricane that took my air, The mystery that seemed to know secrets about me that I didn't even know. It was reason against temptation, stability against fire. I couldn't avoid. Every time she closed her eyes, the moments with Marcus came back. How he smiled, how his eyes disarmed any defense I was trying to lift. It was as if my own mind was conspiring against me, bringing back everything I wanted to forget, and everything I wanted to feel again. One night, Dave called later than normal. He seemed exhausted, but still excited. I promise that as soon now. As I get back, let's take time just for both of us, okay? He said, and I agreed, trying to ignore the knot in my throat. I wanted to believe this would be enough. That would be enough to drown everything Marcus aroused in me. But it was like trying to put out a fire with a drop of water. Meanwhile, Marcus was still present, even at a distance. He never needed to say a lot. His messages did the work alone. "Are you okay today?" he asked one night. I could ignore it, but I couldn't. "I am fine. And you?" I said, hesitant. His answer came fast. "Better now." Just 2 words, but it was enough to set it up all over again. These interactions were dangerous. Each message, every word changed, was like a spark that threatened to blow it up, and I knew I was in a crossroads. But what really scared me was to realize that no matter the way I chose, I was already burned. The question was not just choosing between Dave and Marcus. It was not only between stable love and wild desire. It was about who I wanted to be, what I was willing to risk, and what I was ready to lose. Marcus showed me a side of mine that I didn't even know it existed. One side that longed for something else, something new, something exciting, something that made my skin tingling. But the cost of that, I still didn't know, and maybe was afraid to find out. When Dave came home, it seemed that everything stopped for a moment. He hugged me, kissed me, and said how much he missed me. And I wanted to answer with the same enthusiasm, but all I got was a weak smile. Why the truth? My heart was elsewhere, divided between comfort and chaos. At that moment, I realized something. The choices we make are not just our relationships, they define who we are. And no matter what I decided, there was a price to pay. There is always. And you? Have you ever felt this kind of division between what your head says and what your heart, or something even deeper, begs? Leave in the comments. And if you liked the story, enjoy, share, and subscribe to the channel. See you next time, or until the next hurricane.